The letter arrived at Hargrove Capital Partners on a Tuesday morning in early October, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope with no return address beyond a post office box in Denver, Colorado. It was addressed directly to the firm's senior managing director, a man named Preston Aldrich, and it contained 4 sentences. The 4th sentence informed Preston that a representative of the Callaway Vance family office would be arriving at 10:00 a.m. on Thursday, October 12th, to conduct a preliminary site visit before a formal capital commitment was made. The 3rd sentence specified the amount under consideration, $340 million. Preston read those 4 sentences standing at his assistant's desk on the 31st floor of the Meridian Tower in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, and by the time he reached the end of the last line, his coffee had gone completely cold in his hand. He didn't drink it. He walked back into his office, closed the glass door behind him, and called an emergency partners meeting for that same afternoon. Before we go any further, I want to know where you're watching from right now. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I'm always amazed at how far these stories reach. To understand what happened on the morning of Thursday, October 12th, you have to understand what Hargrove Capital Partners was, and more precisely, what it was trying to become. The firm had been founded 18 years earlier by Preston Aldrich and 2 college friends, Marcus Webb and Daniel Cho. They'd started in a 2-room office on the 3rd floor of a building that no longer existed, managing money for dentists and regional real estate developers. They'd been competent, methodical, and fortunate enough to survive the 2008 financial crisis with their reputation mostly intact. Over the years, the assets under management had grown, the office had moved, the suits had gotten better. But Hargrove Capital had never quite broken through to the institutional tier, the level where sovereign wealth funds and family offices and endowments treated you as a serious first-call manager. That was the ceiling Preston could feel every day when he walked into the Meridian Tower lobby and rode the elevator to the 31st floor. The firm managed $4.2 billion in assets, respectable, solid, but not transformational, to cross into what Preston called the next category, to become the firm that the genuinely wealthy trusted with generational capital. They needed a single landmark commitment from a landmark name, the kind that other allocators noticed, the kind that changed who answered your calls. The Callaway Vance family office was that kind of name. Evelyn Callaway Vance, the matriarch who had built the family office over 4 decades, had died 3 years earlier, leaving her estate to be managed by a board of trustees and a principal investment officer. The family's holdings were legendary in private wealth circles, a sprawling portfolio built on early positions in logistics, healthcare infrastructure, and southeastern real estate that had compounded quietly and relentlessly since the 1970s. The family didn't advertise. They didn't give interviews. But when the Callaway Vance name appeared in the limited partners section of a fund's document, that fund's credibility doubled overnight. Preston Aldrich knew this as well as he knew his own birthday. He spent Wednesday, October 11th, transforming his firm. He had facilities deep clean the 31st floor. He ordered new flowers for the reception area, white orchids, not the usual mixed arrangement. He pulled the 3 best analysts off their current work and had them prepare briefing books on every fund Hargrove had ever managed. He told his receptionist, a 24-year-old named Cody Marsh, to wear his best suit and to offer the visitors still water, sparkling water, or fresh-pressed juice the moment they stepped off the elevator. He briefed his 2 senior partners, Linda Huang and Robert Fenwick, on the visit and told them to be available but not hovering. He did not, at any point, think to ask what the representative from the Callaway Vance family office looked like. He didn't need to. He'd built a picture in his mind without being aware he was building it. The picture looked like someone from a certain kind of background, a certain kind of institution, a certain kind of world that Preston Aldrich had always moved through, without ever questioning whether the picture itself was the problem. Her name was Simone Vance-Okafor. She was 43 years old, the granddaughter of Evelyn Calloway Vance through Evelyn's daughter Patricia, who had married a man named Dr. Chukwemeka Okafor, a cardiologist from Lagos who had completed his residency at Johns Hopkins and built a quiet, distinguished life in suburban Maryland before passing away when Simone was 19. Simone had her grandmother's eyes, deep-set and still, the kind that absorbed a room without appearing to move, and her father's precision. She had studied economics at Georgetown, earned a master's in finance from the Wharton School, and spent 12 years at a global asset management firm in New York before her grandmother called her home to Denver to run the family's investment operation. She had managed the Calloway Vance portfolio through 2 recessions and a pandemic. She had authorized capital commitments totaling over $1.8 billion across the last 7 years. She was, by every objective measure, one of the most consequential private investors operating in the mid-market space in the United States. She was also a black woman, and she was about to walk through the front doors of Hargrove Capital Partners in a camel-colored wool coat, carrying a leather portfolio case that cost more than most people's monthly rent, at precisely 9:58 a.m. on Thursday, October 12th. Now that you've met Simone, I have to ask, does her story hit close to home? Have you known someone like her? Someone who walked into a room and immediately had to prove they belonged? Tell me about them in the comments. The lobby of the Meridian Tower was a different world from the 31st floor. Down on street level, the building was managed by a separate facilities and security company called Apex Building Services. The lobby security team rotated on shifts, and the Thursday morning shift was staffed by 2 guards. A senior officer named Gary Pittman, who had worked Meridian Tower for 11 years and knew the building's tenants with the easy familiarity of someone who has taken attendance in the same classroom for a decade, and a newer guard named Derek Hollis, who had transferred from a retail complex in Gastonia 6 months earlier and was still developing his feel for the building's rhythms. Gary was on a break at 9:57 a.m. Derek was at the desk. Simone Vance-Okafor pushed through the revolving door at 9:58, removed her sunglasses, and scanned the lobby directory board for the Hargrove Capital Partners listing. She found it, Suite 3100, 31st floor, and walked toward the elevator bank with the unhurried, measured stride of someone who is exactly where she intends to be. Derek watched her cross the lobby. He watched the coat. He watched the portfolio case. He watched the way she moved. And somewhere in the space between observation and judgment, something went wrong. Later, when people tried to reconstruct what he'd been thinking, he would say only that she didn't look like she was going to an office meeting. He would not be able to explain, when pressed, what he thought a person going to an office meeting was supposed to look like. He would not have a good answer for that question. He stepped out from behind the desk. "Excuse me," he said. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Simone stopped. She turned. "I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Hargrove Capital Partners, Suite 3100. Do you have an ID and a visitor registration?" "I don't have a visitor registration because I wasn't asked to complete one," she said, with complete evenness. "I was invited by the firm. You're welcome to call up." Derek looked at her for a moment. He looked at the elevator bank. He looked back at her. "I'm going to need you to wait over here while I confirm," he said, gesturing toward a seating area near the far wall. Not the front concierge desk, where visitors who were expected typically waited, but the overflow chairs near the building's secondary entrance, the ones positioned closest to the street-facing windows, away from the elevators. Simone did not move toward the chairs. "You can confirm from here," she said. "The number for Hargrove Capital is in your directory." Derek's posture shifted. "Ma'am, I need you to wait in the designated area." "I'm not going to do that," Simone said. Her voice remained perfectly level. "I am a scheduled guest. I arrived on time. You can call upstairs, or you can let me proceed to the elevator." That was when Derek made the call that changed the morning. He didn't call upstairs to Hargrove Capital. He called Preston Aldrich's direct line, which was listed in the building's tenant directory for emergency contact purposes, and said, "Sir, there's a woman in the lobby claiming she has an appointment with your firm. I'm having trouble getting her to comply with our visitor protocol." Preston Aldrich, who was standing in his glass-walled office on the 31st floor, watching the street below and waiting for a town car to pull up, registered two things almost simultaneously: the word "woman" and the phrase "trouble getting her to comply." And instead of saying what he should have said, "Is her name Simone Vance-Okafor?" "She's our 10 o'clock. Please send her right up," Preston said. "Can you detain her until we can verify?" "I don't want anyone wandering the floor." Derek heard the word "detain." He walked back towards Simone. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to have to ask you to stay here until we get this sorted out. I've been instructed to detain you until the tenant can verify your identity." The lobby fell very quiet. A FedEx courier near the mailroom looked up. A woman in a green blazer waiting for the elevator turned her head. Simone Vance-Okafor stood completely still for 3 seconds, and the stillness itself was a kind of answer. Not submission, not anger, but a bone-deep, deeply familiar composure that came from years of knowing exactly what was happening and choosing, precisely, how to respond to it. She reached into her coat pocket and took out her phone. "I'm going to make a call," she said. "Ma'am, I'm not asking for your permission," she said. "I'm informing you. After what Derek and Preston just did to Simone, I need to hear your reaction. What would you have done standing in that lobby? Drop it in the comments right now." The weight of what happened in that lobby did not disappear when the moment passed. It settled into Simone Vance-Okafor's body the way these moments always did, not as a wave of emotion but as a dull, familiar pressure behind the sternum that she had learned, over the course of her entire adult professional life, to hold very, very still. She had been stopped in lobbies before. She had been asked for extra identification at events she was keynoting. She had been directed to the service entrance at a building where she was the highest net worth person in the room. She had sat across from people at conference tables who looked through her until the moment they realized who she was, and then watched their faces reorganize themselves into something warmer and more deferential. And she had shaken those hands and closed those deals because the deal mattered. And because she was her grandmother's granddaughter, and because Evelyn Calloway Vance had raised her to be more interested in leverage than in performance. But this, to be told on a public lobby floor by a building security guard acting on the instructions of the man she was traveling across 4 states to write a 9-figure check to be told to stay put, to wait, to be detained, as if her presence in a professional office building required containment. This one hit a specific nerve. She thought about her grandmother. Evelyn had built her fortune in an era when the resistance was not subtle. Evelyn had been turned away from banks, locked out of commercial real estate deals, told with directness and without any pretense of courtesy that her money was not wanted. She had built her empire anyway, with a patience and a ferocity that Simone had spent her entire life trying to understand. Evelyn had told her once, "The rooms that won't open for you aren't worth having. Build bigger rooms." Simone looked at the revolving door. She looked at the elevator bank. She looked at Derek Hollis, who was standing 4 feet away from her with his hands clasped in front of him, not looking at her now. She made her call. She called Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb was one of Hargrove Capital's two founding partners alongside Preston Aldrich, but he was also something else. He was the reason the Callaway-Vance letter had been addressed to Hargrove in the first place. 22 years earlier, Marcus Webb, then a 26-year-old junior analyst, had driven 4 hours to attend a financial literacy seminar in Raleigh, North Carolina, where an older woman named Evelyn Callaway Vance had given a 40-minute talk on capital formation in underserved markets. After the talk, Marcus had introduced himself and asked her one question so precise and so earnest that Evelyn had given him her personal card. They had stayed in contact for 19 years, exchanging letters, actual paper letters, Evelyn's preference, until her death. It was that relationship, that 22-year thread of mutual respect, that had led the family office's board to consider Hargrove at all. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Simone." "Marcus," she said, "I'm in your building lobby. I've been told by your security guard, acting on instructions from Preston Aldrich, to remain in this spot until my identity can be verified. I wanted you to know before I make my next call." There was a pause. "Not a long one. Do not move," Marcus said. "I will be there in 60 seconds." He was there in 47. The elevator doors opened, and Marcus Webb walked out at a pace that was not quite running but was not anything like walking. He was 51 years old, heavy-set, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and a face that had always been better at conveying feeling than concealing it. He saw Simone standing near the overflow chairs. She had not sat, had not moved an inch from where she'd planted herself. And something shifted in his expression that was equal parts relief and mortification. "Simone," he said, reaching her. He clasped her hand in both of his. "I am so sorry. Please come upstairs." He turned to Derek Hollis. "This is Simone Vance-Okafor. She is our invited guest and she is welcome in this building." "Is that clear?" Derek said. "Yes, sir." Marcus didn't say anything else to Derek. He guided Simone toward the elevator, and in the 31 floors of silence that followed, he did not fill the air with explanations or apologies, because he understood that in this particular moment, silence was more respectful than words. The elevator opened onto the 31st floor. Preston Aldrich was standing at the reception desk, and the moment he saw Simone, the coat, the portfolio case, the quiet authority, his face went through 3 expressions in the space of 2 seconds. The first was surprise. The second was comprehension. The third was something that Preston Aldrich would spend a long time afterward being unable to name. Right now, Simone is about to walk into that conference room and make a decision that will determine the fate of this firm and every person in it. Before I tell you what she did, what would your move have been? Tell me in the comments. She sat down at the conference table. She did not bring up the lobby. She opened her portfolio case, removed 3 documents, and placed them on the table with the precise, unhurried movements of someone who operates entirely on her own timeline. Linda Huang and Robert Fenwick were already seated. Marcus sat across from Preston. Cody Marsh appeared in the doorway with still water and was waved in with a nod. Preston Aldrich introduced himself and began his prepared remarks. Simone let him speak for approximately 4 minutes. Then she set down her pen. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "before we discuss the fund, I want to address what happened this morning." The room's temperature did not change, but the quality of its silence did. "I was stopped in your building's lobby by a security guard who was acting on your instruction. I was told to remain in a designated area and that I was being detained pending verification of my identity. I had arrived on time, I had identified myself, and I had offered to allow a call to be made on my behalf. The guard chose not to make that call. You, when contacted by that guard, chose to issue a detention instruction rather than simply confirm my appointment." Preston opened his mouth. "I'd like to finish," Simone said. He closed it. "I want to be clear about why I'm still in this room," she said. I am still in this room because of my relationship with Marcus, and because of the respect I had for his mentor, Evelyn Calloway Vance, who was also my grandmother. I am not in this room because of anything that happened downstairs. What happened downstairs was not an accident or a miscommunication. It was a decision, and the decisions people make when they don't know who they're dealing with tell you considerably more about them than the decisions they make when they do. She looked at Preston Aldrich with those deep-set, still eyes. So I want to ask you one question, and I want an honest answer, because I will know if it's honest. When Derek Hollis called you this morning and described a woman in the lobby who was not complying, did you picture someone who looked like me? And did that picture affect the instruction you gave? The silence in the room was total. Preston Aldrich was not, by any honest accounting, a bad man. He was a man who had spent his career in a particular world, built particular habits of perception, and had never once been required to hold those habits up to the light and examine what was actually in them. He was 62 years old. He had shaken hands with thousands of people. He had never, to his own knowledge, intentionally discriminated against anyone. He had also, this morning, told a security guard to detain a black woman in his building's lobby without once asking for her name. He sat with that for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. Yes, he said, one word. No qualification, no explanation, no pivot, just yes. Something shifted in Simone's posture, fractionally. Thank you, she said. That's the honest answer. Marcus Webb, who had known Preston Aldrich for 30 years, exhaled very slowly through his nose. Simone picked up her pen. Now, let's talk about the fund. What followed was a 2-hour meeting that every person in that conference room would later describe, independently and unprompted, as the most intellectually rigorous capital allocation discussion they had ever been part of. Simone Vance-Okafor knew the Hargrove funds in a depth that made Preston realize, gradually and then all at once, that she had been studying them for months. She knew their 2019 vintage return dispersion. She knew their fee structures across share classes. She knew the individual deal that had underperformed in their second healthcare fund, and exactly why the thesis had been wrong. She asked about the succession plan for Marcus, who was 3 years from 60, and she asked about it directly, looking at Marcus, not at Preston, because she understood that this question was about human capital and trust, and not about business planning in any abstract sense. She asked about the firm's diversity at the partner level. Linda Huang, who had been the firm's first female partner and its only partner of color, answered that question without looking at Preston. Simone listened. She wrote 3 lines on her notepad. At 11:45, she closed her portfolio case. I have what I need for the preliminary, she said. The board's next step will be a formal due diligence request, which you'll receive within 15 business days. I'll be the point of contact. She stood. Everyone else stood. One more thing, she said, and she said it to Preston. What happened this morning? The board will need to know about it. Not from me, from you. That's not a threat, it's a condition. The Calloway Vance family office doesn't allocate to firms whose leadership treats incidents like this morning's as things to be quietly smoothed over. We allocate to firms whose leadership is willing to account for them. If you send a written account of this morning to our trustees before the due diligence request arrives, we continue. If you don't, we don't. She looked at him for one more moment. You have my card, she said. She walked out. Marcus walked her to the elevator. They stood there together for a moment, and Simone said something to Marcus that only Marcus heard, something quiet and private, and Marcus nodded once, and the elevator doors opened and she was gone. Marcus stood at the elevator bank for a long time after the doors closed. Preston Aldrich sat at the empty conference table for 40 minutes after the meeting ended. His partners left the room. Cody Marsh came in and collected the water glasses and left. The orchids at the reception desk were still white and perfect in their arrangement. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Charlotte moved the way it always moved. Traffic on College Street, a construction crane frozen against the October sky, the ordinary machinery of the day continuing without reference to what had happened on the 31st floor. Preston had a yellow legal pad in front of him. He had been trying to write for most of those 40 minutes. At 12:31 p.m., he wrote the date at the top of the page. At 12:34 p.m., he wrote, "To the Board of Trustees, Callaway Vance Family Office." At 12:40 p.m., he wrote, "This morning I made a decision that I am ashamed of." He stopped there for a while. He thought about the picture he had built in his mind, without knowing he was building it. He thought about how confident he had been in that picture. He thought about the years of handshakes and deal tables and partners' dinners that had never once required him to look at the picture and ask where it came from and what it cost. He thought about Simone Vance-Okafor's voice, which had not been angry, and somehow that was the thing that hit hardest, the absence of anger, the complete control, as if she had been through this so many times that she had built a procedure for it, a measured and systematic way of making the responsible party account for their own decision rather than requiring her to carry the weight of their discomfort. He wrote for another hour and 15 minutes. The letter was 4 pages long. It described the phone call from Derek Hollis. It described his instruction to detain. It described what he believed upon reflection had driven that instruction. It did not use the word misunderstanding. It did not use the phrase "I didn't mean to." It was, for a 62-year-old man who had spent his entire career in a world that had never required this kind of accounting from him, a remarkably honest document. He had it notarized and dispatched by courier to the Callaway Vance family office in Denver, Colorado, by 4 p.m. that afternoon. Derek Hollis was placed on mandatory retraining by Apex Building Services the following week, pending a full review of the incident which had been documented in the building's security log. The review process included a formal sit-down with the building's HR liaison and the Meridian Tower property manager, a woman named Teresa Colquitt, who had managed the building for 9 years and who did not find the incident acceptable in any of its particulars. Gary Pittman, the senior guard who had been on break, came to learn what had happened later that afternoon from a FedEx courier, and the woman in the green blazer, both of whom had been present in the lobby. Gary, who was 48 years old and had 2 daughters, and a very clear sense of how lobbies were supposed to work, had a private conversation with his shift supervisor that evening. He would later be recognized by Apex Building Services in their year-end review as a model of the professional standard they expected their guards to maintain. He would be the first to tell you that this recognition was not deserved, because he had been on break when it mattered. The Callaway Vance family office's Board of Trustees received Preston's letter on the morning of Friday, October 13th. The board's chair, a 70-year-old attorney named Harriet Vance Drummond, who was Simone's great-aunt, and the last surviving member of Evelyn's generation to sit in an active governance role, read the letter twice. She passed it to the other 3 trustees without comment. The formal due diligence request arrived at Hargrove Capital Partners on October 31st, exactly 15 business days after Simone's visit. It was the most detailed due diligence request any partner at Hargrove had ever seen. 67 items: financial, operational, cultural, governance. Item 44 asked Hargrove to describe any incidents in the past 5 years that had implicated questions of equity, bias, or discrimination, and to describe what actions had been taken in response. Item 45 asked Hargrove to describe what changes, if any, it intended to implement as a result of such incidents. Linda Huang drafted the responses to items 44 and 45 personally. The due diligence process took 4 months. Simone's voice was finally heard. But here's what I want to know. Have you ever had a moment where you walked into a room and had to hold yourself together while someone made a decision about who you were before you'd spoken a single word? Have you ever had to account for someone else's assumptions while still conducting yourself with complete professionalism? Share that story. Someone watching needs to hear it. The commitment letter was executed on February 28th of the following year, on a Monday morning, in a conference room in Denver that looked out over the Rocky Mountains in the particular clean light of high winter. $340 million. The signing was attended by Simone Vance-Okafor, Harriet Vance Drummond, and 2 other trustees. From Hargrove Capital, Marcus Webb attended, Preston Aldrich attended, Linda Huang attended. There was no fanfare. There were no photographs. The Callaway Vance family office did not do photographs. What there was a handshake, firm, direct, eye contact, between Simone Vance-Okafor and Preston Aldrich. "You did the harder thing," Simone said. Preston Aldrich nodded. "Not as hard as the thing you did," he said. It was the truest thing he had said in a long time. In the months that followed, Hargrove Capital Partners underwent what Linda Huang would later describe in an interview. Not for the press, but for an internal equity forum hosted by a network of mid-market asset managers, as a structured reckoning. Not dramatic, not performative, a structural audit of every process in the firm that contained a decision point where unconscious preference could operate. Hiring, deal sourcing, meeting scheduling, the question of who got sent to represent the firm and who stayed in the office. The audit was led by an external consultant and took 8 months. It resulted in 11 specific operational changes, 3 of which required restructuring how the partners group itself was constituted. Marcus Webb, who had 60 days before his 52nd birthday, was named co-managing director alongside Preston. Linda Huang was named to the investment committee for the first time in her 11 years at the firm. A new analyst class was recruited the following spring, with the first cohort in the firm's history that did not default to a particular demographic pipeline. None of these changes were announced publicly. Hargrove Capital was not the kind of firm that announced things, but the allocators in their network noticed. The calls changed. The quality of conversations changed. A firm in Nashville that had been cool toward Hargrove for years sent a note requesting a meeting. The Callaway Vance Capital did what Landmark Capital does. It moved the room. Simone Vance-Okafor sits today in the same office in Denver where her grandmother kept her records, a corner room with built-in bookshelves and a view of the Front Range that changes with every season. The desk is mahogany and older than Simone. On the wall behind it, there is one framed photograph. Evelyn Callaway Vance at a podium in Raleigh, North Carolina, circa 1991, eyes steady, hands at rest, saying something to a room that had not expected to hear it. Simone has made 37 capital commitments on behalf of the family office. She has declined, over the same period, 92 others. The ones she declines are not always the ones with the worst numbers. Sometimes the numbers are fine. Sometimes what's wrong is the room. She has told the story of October 12th to exactly 3 people outside the transaction: her mother, her closest colleague, and a young woman named Brianna Colston, who attended the same Wharton program Simone had graduated from 30 years ago, and who had called Simone for advice on navigating a situation that sounded, in its broad outlines, uncomfortably familiar. Simone had listened for 20 minutes. Then she had said, "Document everything, say what you mean. Don't let them make it about your reaction. Make it about their decision. Those are 2 different things." She paused. "And call me when it's over," she said. "I'll want to know how it goes." Brianna Colston called her 11 months later. It went well. In Charlotte, at the Meridian Tower, the lobby looks the same as it always has. The revolving door turns. The elevator banks open and close. The lobby security team rotates on their shifts, and the morning shift now includes a mandatory protocol. Instated by Apex Building Services 6 months after the October incident, that requires guest notifications to be confirmed directly with the named tenant contact before any visitor interaction escalates. The protocol has a name in the internal training materials. The name is not ceremonial. It is just a number in a manual. But it is there, and it matters, and it exists because a woman in a camel-colored wool coat stood her ground in a marble lobby and refused, with complete composure, to accept the premise of someone else's picture. Marcus Webb still writes letters. Not to Evelyn anymore. There is no Evelyn to write to, but he writes them. He writes one every year on October 12th, and the letters go to the young analysts in Hargrove's program, who are rotating through their first year in the industry, and the letters say, in various forms and across various years, the same essential thing. The most important decision you make in any professional encounter is not a financial one. It is the decision about what you assume before the other person has finished speaking. Get that decision wrong, and everything downstream of it is wrong too. He signs them all the same way. He signs them, pay attention. It costs nothing, and it changes everything. If this story hit home, if you've ever walked into a room and felt the weight of someone else's assumptions, or if you've been the person in that lobby who didn't ask the right question in time, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments. And if this is your first time here at Voices Untold, subscribe and stay close. There are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them deserves to be heard.